What Luke tells us is that crowds came for baptism, and these crowds came to sort of start again. What we have here is a symbolic picture and a decision. And what's happening is that the Jordan River marked the boundaries of the Promised Land. And what God leads Joshua to do is to lead the nation to this point. And the night before they cross the Jordan River, the nation takes the time to dedicate themselves to God. And having dedicated themselves to God, the priests lead the way with the Ark of the Covenant, this symbolic representation of the presence of God with his people. And as the priests step into the floodwaters, which in itself is an act of faith, can you imagine the courage it takes to step into a river in flood? But as they step into this river, the river dries up the stream, and it says that the water stacks up upstream. And consequently, the priests can lead through, and they stand in the middle of the Jordan River while all of the Israelites cross through the Jordan. And then they take 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, and then they come out of that and they set up a memorial to remind themselves that God has rescued his people. What you have here is the Jordan River is the symbolic representation of crossing from an old identity to a new identity, from moving from an old perception into a new potential. And there's lots of songs that are sung about that sense of crossing Jordan, almost also being representative in one sense of moving from earth to heaven. That sense of crossing Jordan to arrive in the Promised Land. What you have as the Israelites cross through the Jordan, with this presence of God going with them, is there's a representation that just as God rescued his people from slavery and brought them to the Promised Land, God's presence is going with them and his protection is going with them. But the Israelites are moving into their identity and moving into fulfill the potential that their previous generation hadn't done. Now, roll the clock forward a couple of thousand years, and the Israelites have lost their way. This potential of them crossing into the Promised Land hasn't been fulfilled, where this nation was supposed to be the nation that was God's vineyard, God's role for the nations, that they would discover and find, and that the world would find this relationship with God through his people, has not been fulfilled. And they've gone through periods of exile. They're now governed by the Romans. The Herods are ruling, and you have this corrupt priesthood that's there. And all of a sudden, this prophet is raised up, who once again goes back to the Jordan. And so for people to come and to confess their sins and get baptized in the Jordan, it's almost a picture that they're going back to the beginning. They're going back to this sense of starting again. And what we see is that these people, to get right with God, are coming and confessing their sins and then going through the Jordan to fulfill their potential. That just as Joshua and the people had dedicated themselves before moving into the Promised Land, here are people coming in repentance, confessing their sins, and once again are coming dedicating themselves and committing themselves to God, submitting themselves to God, and through that picking up a new identity and a new purpose in God. So the Jordan River, as John begins his message, as he prepares the way for the King to come and calls people to repentance, the Jordan River is this symbol of a completely fresh start, of moving into a new identity. But it begins with repentance. It goes through dedication and then moves people into a new future. For you and me, as we move into the things of God, often we stand at our own Jordan River. We stand at that point where we're invited to die to our old self and begin and discover a new identity and a new potential. And as John begins this message of preaching that the King is coming and for people to get ready to meet the King, and what it means to live in a relationship with God. We see in there an invitation to cross through our own Jordan River, to pick up a new identity in God and fulfill the potential He has for us. So my question to you today is, have you crossed your Jordan River? Are you ready to pick up that new identity in God and move into fulfilling the potential that God has for you? If you haven't, the invitation is there. Are you ready to cross your Jordan? Are you ready to move into your new identity? Will you come with that sense of repentance and dedication and move into the potential